How's it going, Charger fans? My name is Dr. Jamieson O'Marr. I'm happy to be back on the podcast. Thank you for Guilty as Charged for having me back on. It's been a little while since we've all had the chance to chat, and that's generally a good thing. But today there's actually a decent amount for us to dive into and discuss surrounding the Chargers and the injuries that they've suffered over the last couple of weeks. So hopefully today I'll be able to provide you with a little more information from what we have surrounding Justin Herbert, Rashawn Slater, Joe Alt, some of the other injured Chargers players, which will hopefully give you a better idea of what to expect in the upcoming games, and maybe hopefully give you a little insight into the discussions that the Chargers are having with their players and the players of the medical staff, etc. And hopefully that's interesting for you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So these are the kind of points that I hope to hit on today. We'll talk a little bit about high ankle sprains and Justin Herbert's injury in particular, Joe Halt's MCL injury, Rashawn Slater's pectoral injury and tendon strain, and then a little bit about Joey Bosa's injury. We don't have a ton of information on that at this time, so I won't spend too much time there. And then lastly, we have the Wednesday practice report data now, so I'll go quickly through that. Won't spend a ton of time, but just kind of give us an idea of what we're going to be looking for over the next 3 days. We get further practice reports for these players. So first, let's start talking about Justin Herbert's high ankle sprain. So a high ankle sprain is different from a low ankle sprain, which I think is what most of us think of when we think of, oh man, they have a sprained ankle. This is something that, you're out running in playing a sport or running down the street and you kind of feel your ankle twist generally to the outside. And that's, something that, might be painful for a few days. You can have some minor swelling, but within a week, you're usually pretty good. A high ankle sprain is a little bit different. It tends to be a little bit more of a higher energy injury, and it's affecting the tendons that are not kind of in the lower ankle, but in the upper ankle. And this is actually between the two bones that provide a lot of stability for your ankle. That's the tibia and the fibula. So when you have those ligaments there, and you have those bones there, and you have ligaments in between, when you have a high ankle sprain, you actually injure those ligaments to some degree. Now, it could be minor, it could be severe. In a severe case, those ligaments are actually usually completely disrupted. You have the ability for those two bones to kind of separate, and creates an unstable ankle. That's something that requires surgery. That's what Cooper Kupp underwent, if you all remember from a couple of years ago. And that's not, fortunately, what Justin Herbert had. He was able to kind of play through this, put some weight onto it. They did x-rays. I imagine they determined that, he had stability in that ankle. Those bones weren't widening, but obviously he had some type of injury, some partial injury to that. And I think the closest example that we have to this is what Mahomes suffered during the playoffs last year. I believe in the divisional round, he suffered a high ankle sprain. He was able to keep playing, obviously, and win the Super Bowl that year, but he did have a noticeable decrease in his mobility and pain. And he talked a little bit about that kind of as he went through the process. So I think that's sort of in the realm of where we are with Justin Herbert initially in week 2. He had an aggravation last week in week 3. And by all accounts, it wasn't, fortunately, wasn't that great of an aggravation or causing any further injury or instability. But he is, likely suffering a lot of pain. And this is something that, will take on the order of 2 to 4, sometimes 6 weeks to completely heal if a player is resting it. And Justin Herbert is not one that wants to rest it. In fact, today we got discussion that, he got this quote that he has been talk about him resting until the bye, but he doesn't think it's heading that way. He actually says that he's feeling a little less pain this week than he did last week, which is all, again, good signs and something to keep on a watch over. But this is something that doesn't necessarily get better with a lot of activity and motion on it, and will affect his mobility a little bit, which affects, again, his ability to protect himself and prevent further injury. And with 2 starting left tackles out, these are all calculations the Chargers are making, that they're having discussions with Herbert about. And obviously Herbert wants to play. He's one of the toughest quarterbacks, I think, out there, and that's been shown in a lot of the injuries that he suffered and played through over the last couple of years. But this is not an injury to take lightly, I think. And I think they're all aware of that, and they're kind of having those discussions. So hopefully you kind of understand a little bit more now about what a high ankle sprain is, why we think it's a little bit more severe than a low ankle sprain, and kind of the discussions that are being had. And these are all some things that we'll have to, again, watch over the next couple of days and to see where Herbert goes and whether it's likely that he'll play or not on this upcoming Sunday. All right, next up. Joel. So he suffered, I believe, towards the end of the game, a what's called an MCL sprain or MCL injury. This is something that we've talked a little bit before about on the channel, and involves the inside ligament of your knee. So if you look down, it's that inside, and it generally happens when someone falls into your knee, and that happens for offensive linemen not infrequently when players are getting blocked into them. Their knee bends at a weird angle. You can cause strain of this ligament. In horrible cases, you can actually tear that ligament. That's not what we think happened here. I think sounds like to be a grade 1 or 2 strain, which similar to what Trey Pipkins had at points throughout last season. These injuries generally take, depending on the level of pain and comfort of the patient of the player, anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 weeks to recover. If you have more severe strains, those can be on the order of 4 to 6 weeks. I think offensive linemen do have to generally plant and pivot, and they're at risk of further injury with players getting blocked into it. So these are all things and calculations that their medical staff is making. And I think it's unlikely that we would see him on the field as soon as week 4 against the Chiefs this week. But with the bye week in week 5, I think that we see him in week 6 at some semblance of health. Maybe not a 100%, but close to it. So maybe 90, 85, 90%. And something that's not likely to affect him all that much throughout the rest of the season, which is good. And that extra week of rest during the bye will help a ton. Next up, Rashawn Slater. Let's talk about this pec injury. So this is a left pectoral muscle strain. That is the same side of the biceps tendon tear that he had a couple seasons ago. The good news is that this is not a tear from all the reporting that we have so far. It's a muscle strain. And there's a lot of ambiguity there because it can be a minor muscle strain. It can be a more severe muscle strain. He likely had an MRI to grade that information and kind of give more the team and him more information on what that means for him. But this is an important muscle for an offensive lineman. As you think, your pecs are a lot of responsibility in that pushing, and that's a motion that you have to be able to do well as an offensive lineman, particularly as a tackle. And so it's something that he's not going to be able to necessarily work through if he's having weakness or pain when he's doing that. You can brace these injuries, and you can try to do an offloading shoulder brace and kind of help him feel more comfortable, but they don't work all that well for patients, especially if someone at a high enough level like Rashawn, who's used to kind of having full function. So it's a little hard to kind of prognosticate how he's going to do over the next couple weeks, but I do think we're thinking about this injury on the course of weeks. I think it's very unlikely he plays this week in week 4. But with the bye week, we could potentially see him in week 6. I think it could, be on the order of a month before we see him return to some semblance of 70, 80, 90% of Rashawn. And we'll see if at that point he wants to go back out on the field. I think that's probably likely, and we'll see how he does. But it's something that will likely affect him more than some other positions that we would expect on the field. So something to keep an eye on. Again, I think unlikely for week 4, but with the bye week, they have the potential for week 6, but I think more week 7, 8 territory probably is most likely for him. And then finally, I just wanted to touch briefly on Joey Bosa. We really don't know much about this injury, so I don't want to dive too much into it, but he's suffered what as it being described as a hip injury. It does seem like this might have been an aggravation of what he had in the last couple of weeks. That was, at times described as a back injury, or other kind of soft tissue injuries. Unclear exactly what muscle he strained or pulled, but that seems likely to be the actual injury is, depending on his injury history of previous strains in other parts of his body. It doesn't seem to be bony or anything like that, which in a certain sense is a good thing. I don't think this is something that will keep him out for a very long period, but it's also something that runs the potentially a high risk of re-aggravating during games. Like he didn't play that much in week 2, only 14 snaps, I think. And this happened on the very first snap in week 3. So it's something that, is not going in the right direction. And usually the way that you treat these injuries is just by rest and kind of, toning the player down a bit, letting it calm down completely, and then slowly ramping them back up. Unclear how long that process will take. Again, I think unlikely that we see him as soon as week 4. The bye week, we could see him come back at week 6, but it's likely that there's discussions about, letting it heal completely. And that could be a process that takes, on the order of months, potentially before bringing him back to full play. So we'll see exactly how it progresses. I would not expect to see him this week. With the bye, there's always the potential of week 6, I think with a lot of these injuries, but I wouldn't be surprised if they choose to take it a little bit slower given his injury history and let him progress at at a slower pace until he's truly comfortable and feels like he can go back and play without making this injury any worse. Okay, and lastly, let's just do a quick run through of the injury report. We've already talked about a few of these injuries. I think the other important ones that I think to highlight are is Trey Pipkin's foot injury. He had a DNP. I don't exactly know what that foot injury is. There hasn't been any reporting on it up to this point, but that would be a big blow given the fact that the Chargers are unlikely to have either of their starting tackles this week. And then Otito Ogbonnia's neck injury as well. Unclear exactly what that is. Neck injuries can range in severity, but it's something to monitor. If he continues to have DNPs over the next 2 days, probably unlikely that we see him this week as well. All right. That's all I have for you, Guilty as Charged fam. I appreciate you guys listening in. If you have any questions or anything that came up during the course of the video, please feel free to leave them below. I'll try to answer them as I have time. It's been a pleasure. So again, my name is Dr. Jamieson O'Marr. You can find me on Twitter at Chargers Medical. I kind of post more real-time thoughts there as I see them and as I process them and as time in the hospital allows. But it's always a pleasure getting to come on and share, what little information I have, and hopefully that's interesting for you all. So until next time, guys, bolt up.